January 1979 opens with a country that feels strangely uneven. Some streets look normal, but piles of uncollected bags appear in odd places, and they're not waiting for collection, they're on strike. People queue for buses without knowing if the next one will arrive or if the driver's decided he'd rather not bother. Abroad, Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi leaves Iran on the 16th, taking rather more luggage than most people manage. A tanker collision near Tobago spills crude into the Caribbean on the 19th, which doesn't help the holiday brochures. And Pope John Paul II begins his first international journey, landing in the Dominican Republic on the 25th, with considerably better in-flight service than most of us could expect. Across Europe, design rooms sketch ideas that belong to a future nobody has properly defined yet. And every workshop feels caught between finishing the decade and waiting for the next one to begin. Some say the three cars in this episode represent survival, sentiment, and a socialist dream wrapped in steel that wasn't quite sure which way it wanted to rust. All we know is they're the Volvo 66, the Mini 1000, and the FSO Polonez. This is Four Wheels and Fuel, Season 3, Episode 2. 3 paths, 1 month, and plenty of stories left in the tank. Let's begin.
Volvo 66 lanserades 1975, en utpräglad stadsbil, utrustad med steglös automatlåda och en motor på 47 hästkrafter. Bilen tillverkades i Holland av Volvo Car, den före detta DAF-fabriken som Volvo köpte in sig i 1972. 106 000 Volvo 66 tillverkades mellan 1975 och 1980.
Volvo 66. The Volvo 66 didn't start life as a Volvo at all. It began as the DAF 66, a Dutch creation built around a transmission system that had no gears. Because apparently the Dutch looked at a normal gearbox and thought, no, too simple. Volvo bought the operation in 1975 and kept building it in Born, Netherlands. By January 1979, it had been a Volvo for nearly 4 years, though it still carried its Dutch origins, like a passport stamp you can't scrub off. It was meant to fill a gap at the bottom of the range. Mum might have found it sensible for town errands, where its unusual transmission became a conversation topic. Under the bonnet, and you'd find a 1.1-litre Renault engine, producing 45 brake horsepower. Enough power to pull the skin off a rice pudding. The sprint to 60 miles per hour took somewhere near 19 seconds. What mattered was the Variomatic transmission, a belt-driven system with no clutch pedal. It hummed like a very enthusiastic sewing machine, but it worked, mostly. Inside, the Volvo 66 felt narrow but not uncomfortable. The seats were upright in durable vinyl or cloth. The dashboard was simple, with a few dials and switchgear that clicked with modest confidence. There was no wood, no leather, just Scandinavian utilitarianism with a faint whiff of disappointment. The gear lever was absent, replaced by a short stick that toggled between forward and reverse. Dad would have appreciated the lack of fuss, though he might have missed telling everyone they were doing it wrong. From the outside, the 66 looked neat in that very Dutch way. Boxy, honest, and completely unbothered by trends. The nose stood upright with a simple grille and round lamps, giving it a face that was more functional than flashy. Along the edges sat slim black bumpers, modest at first glance, but reinforced enough to satisfy Volvo's safety conscience. Down the flanks, the lines stayed straight and unpretentious, with narrow indicators and a beltline crease trying its best to lift the mood. At each corner, pressed steel wheels filled the arches without fuss. No hubcaps, no glamour, just sturdy metal doing the job. Driving the Volvo 66 meant accepting a different rhythm. You pressed the accelerator and the engine revved higher than expected, while the variomatic belts adjusted with a noise suggesting a small animal was trapped in the transmission. There was no gear change, just steady acceleration and a mechanical hum. The steering was light and the ride soft, though narrow tires meant you felt every imperfection. On a cold morning, it started without drama and warmed up slowly. Uncle might have found it charmingly odd, like a distant relative who insists on wearing sandals to weddings. It wasn't fast, wasn't fashionable, but it got on quietly.
He's back! He's got it! It's super.
Here is the revolutionary Morris Mini Minor. The engine is mounted across the car so that it can take 4 people in comfort with all their luggage. Look how much room there is. You can put things under the back seat, in the door compartments, and in the large trunk. See how easy the Morris Mini Minor is to park. It reaches 70 miles an hour, and it does 50 miles to the gallon. 4-wheel independent suspension gives big car smoothness. The quality first Morris Mini Minor is the perfect family car.
Mini 1000. The Mini 1000 was, by January 1979, already 20 years old in spirit, which made it either a design classic or a stubborn refusal to accept that time moves forward. Alec Isigonis had drawn the original in 1959, demanding maximum interior space within minimum exterior dimensions. The solution was radical. Transverse engine, front-wheel drive, tiny wheels at each corner, and rubber cone suspension. The 1000 variant arrived in 1967 with a slightly larger engine. By the late 70s, it had survived oil shocks and strike action. The Mini kept selling because people still wanted one. Grandad might have remembered when they first appeared, small enough to park anywhere, and cheeky enough to make driving feel like an event. Pop the bonnet, or rather lift the entire front panel, and you'd find a 998 CCA series engine sitting sideways, producing 39 brake horsepower. The gearbox was tucked underneath, sharing its oil with the engine in a way that made mechanics wince. The sprint to 60 miles per hour took around 20 seconds, though the Mini always felt faster because you were sitting so close to the ground. Inside, the Mini 1000 was an exercise in making the most of very little. The seats were thin and upright, in vinyl or basic cloth. The dashboard was a flat metal panel with a large center dial, 2 small oil and temperature dials, and a few toggle switches. The gear lever sprouted from the floor with a short throw. There was no center console, no armrest, no pretense of luxury. Storage came in under the seats and in the door compartments, and what Minnie proudly called the large boot. Mum would have found it cramped but clever, everything within reach, even if nothing was where you'd expect it. From the outside, the Mini 1000 still wore the face it had been given 2 decades earlier. The front was almost flat, with a simple grille and round headlamps in chrome bezels. The bumpers were thin and wrapped around the corners. The wheels were 10 inches in diameter, making it look like it was wearing shoes 2 sizes too small. Driving the Mini 1000 meant sitting low and feeling every input. The steering communicated every ripple in the tarmac. The suspension was firm, sending vibrations through the seat. Cornering felt flat and planted, making you feel like a driving god, until you tried to overtake and remembered you had 39 brake horsepower. On a cold January morning, it took a few turns before the engine settled into a chattery idle. The heater worked eventually. Aunt would have loved how it nipped through traffic and squeezed into impossible spaces. It was small, stubborn, and refused to fade away.
FSO Polonez. The FSO Polonez arrived in 1978 as Poland's attempt to build a modern family car that could compete beyond the Iron Curtain, which was either admirably ambitious or spectacularly optimistic. FSO, Fabryka Samochodów Osobowych, began in the early 1950s by building the Soviet-designed Warszawa, and later expanded through a major licensing deal with Fiat in the mid-60s. By the mid-70s, they were ready to try something of their own. The Polonez was developed in-house with styling input from Giorgetto Giugiaro's Italdesign, while the mechanicals came straight from the aging Polski Fiat 125P. By January 1979, it had been on sale for less than a year, exported to Western Europe with a price that undercut most competition. Dad might have seen one and wondered if the badge was worth the discount. Pop the bonnet and you'd find a 1.5-litre Fiat engine, producing 75 brake horsepower. Competitive, assuming the competition was having a bad day. The sprint to 60 miles per hour took around 15 seconds, respectable for a family hatchback. Inside, the Polonez felt spacious in a way that surprised passengers. The seats were upright in durable cloth, the automotive equivalent of builders' work trousers. The dashboard was angular and symmetrical, with instruments grouped in a rectangular binnacle. The switchgear clicked with mechanical honesty, like light switches in a Soviet hotel. There was decent legroom in the back, and the hatchback meant loading shopping didn't require Tetris-level planning. Your mum would have appreciated the practicality, even if the materials didn't match what Ford had been offering. From the outside, the Polonez wore Giugiaro's influence clearly. The front was clean and wedge-shaped, with round headlamps sitting flush with the bodywork. The bumpers were black plastic, a silent admission that too much chrome was expensive. The roofline sloped gently toward the rear, where a large glass hatch opened to reveal a generous load area. It wasn't pretty, but it was purposeful. Driving the FSO Polonez meant accepting a few compromises. The steering was light but lacked feedback, like wearing thick gloves while threading a needle. The ride was soft and absorbent, though body roll in corners reminded you this wasn't built for spirited driving. On a cold morning, it started without fuss and warmed up reasonably. Your uncle might have found it intriguing, a car from a place most people didn't associate with automotive ambition. The Volvo 66 arrived with Dutch engineering and Swedish badges, humming its way through town with a transmission that sounded like it was knitting a jumper. The Mini 1000 refused to acknowledge that 2 decades had passed, still cornering flat and fitting into spaces that shouldn't exist. And the FSO Polonez carried Poland's automotive ambitions westward, doing its earnest best with Fiat bones and Italian styling. Do you remember any of these? Did your family own one? Or did you spot them parked outside the shops on a cold January morning? We'd love to hear your stories. If you enjoyed this episode, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep these stories going. And if you'd like to give the show an extra push, you can buy me a coffee. The link's in the description. Next time, we're looking at a Japanese executive that took luxury seriously. An Italian coupe that mixed elegance with rallying spirit. And a German wedge that rewrote the hatchback rulebook. January 1979 had its struggles, but the cars kept rolling, and so do we.